Oh, hello, and welcome to this session on creating and sustaining anti-oppressive relationships in social work using the Mandela model. My name is Prospera Tedam, and I will be talking you through some of the ideas in relation to how we as social workers can not only create but also sustain anti-oppressive relationships in social work. So, a warm welcome to this discussion about how to use the Mandela model in the workplace to minimize oppression, discrimination, and racism. So that's one of the aims of the Mandela model. The other aim is to actually enhance relationships between and amongst staff. Just to get us going, a little bit about me. So, as you know, my name's Prospera Tedam. I qualified as a social worker in 1996. I practiced in frontline children and families, adoption, asylum-seeking children, looked after children. My practice experience actually was quite varied. I've taught for 14 years in the UK in various HEIs, higher education institutions. So I've taught at the Open University, University of Northampton, and more latterly, Anglia Ruskin University in Cambridge, Chelmsford, and Peterborough, sorry. I'm currently on a 4-year contract at the United Arab Emirates University, and I'm based in a town called Al Ain, where I teach on a range of undergraduate and postgraduate social work modules. My research interests are around equality and diversity in social work practice and education. So I'm actually quite interested in how we as educators can support students in understanding the importance and the value of equality and diversity, and how then that education we provide at universities, how then that translates into practice with service users. Obviously, I have a keen interest in anti-oppressive practice, faith-based abuse and critical theories. I have a forthcoming book with Sage, Anti-Oppressive Social Work Practice, which is due out in October, and I will notify you through your workforce development leads about any potential launch dates for the book. I'm also interested in critical theories that are not just about let's talk about what's happening, but let's also find ways of acting, so activism, and changing the status quo. So more recently, my practice experience has been as a child safeguarding advisor to the Home Office. Specifically, I worked on the Home Office Family Returns Panel, and it was a 7-year ministerial appointment where my role was to advise the minister in relation to children who no longer had legal recourse to stay in the UK, and my advice was around safeguarding matters if those children or particular children were returned to countries of their parents' origin. So that's a little bit about me. For this session, I want to talk briefly about what the learning outcomes are, what I'm expecting to be in terms of the learning outcomes. So I'm hoping that we will we'll examine the concepts of unconscious bias and oppression. I will introduce the Mandela model as a tool for anti-oppressive practice with colleagues and with service users. I'm going to encourage you throughout to think about and consider how your daily practice and interactions can minimize oppression. And finally, we aim to outline strategies that can create and sustain positive professional relationships. So without much ado, I'm going to launch into the presentation, which basically from the point of introduction. As we know, social work is essentially about relationships. It's about our relationships with service users, with colleagues not just from social work, but colleagues from other professional backgrounds, for example, health colleagues, education colleagues, police, law enforcement, and other voluntary and third sector organizations. And we know it is well established that effective relationships are central to successful outcomes. So, what are some of the things that may impact on these relationships? We know that unconscious bias is one of the things that has come into the fold. It's come into the language of not just social work, but in terms of working with people more generally. And so I want to begin this discussion by really just asking you on your own or with a colleague to discuss what you understand, what is your understanding of unconscious bias. Whilst this is a pre-recorded video, and I will proceed and carry on with the presentation, I would want you at this point to pause your computers, pause the audio and the video, and really do have a think about what unconscious bias is to you, and have a discussion, a comparison with your colleague, and see what they think. I'm not going to allow that space now. As I said, when you get to that point, it would be useful if you just paused your computer and listened to your colleague or reflect on your own. I've grown to like this definition by the Kirwan Institute. They talk about unconscious bias as the attitudes or stereotypes that affect our understanding and affect our actions and our decision making in an unconscious manner. These biases, which encompass both favorable and unfavorable assessments, are activated involuntarily and without an individual's awareness or intentional control. One of the things I will say about unconscious bias is that everyone has got it. We all have these biases that are in our subconscious that we are not conscious of. And I would just kind of like to say that, we need to start thinking about unconscious bias as this is not about finger pointing, this is not about blaming, that we all have biases. But how do these biases affect our actions? How do they affect our understanding? And more importantly, how do they affect our decision making about people, groups, and individuals? So we'll be talking about unconscious bias as we go along. So research suggests that unconscious bias, there's two main forms of unconscious bias. So conscious, if you like, or two forms of bias. So conscious bias or explicit, which is I know about it and I am intentionally or purposely treating somebody in a way that's not right. Or unconscious bias, where it's what we're talking about today, which is what we have in our subconscious. We don't really think about it. We don't give it much effort. We don't give it much time. But really and truly, when we come to make decisions about groups of people, who is deserving and who is not deserving, this is fluid language, who is deserving of our services and who is not, then we build into that decision making several things, and one of which might be an unconscious bias of the type of person trying to access the service, the family trying to access the service, or some kind of stereotype that we hold against certain particular people, particular groups. So for the purposes of this conversation today, and as you go along with this, biases are not limited to race or ethnicity. And so when we talk about unconscious bias, we're not necessarily talking about it in relation to race and ethnicity. It can exist towards any group in relation to gender, gender identity, age, physical abilities, weight, sexual orientation, religion, faith, a whole host of social groupings. So for us as social workers, what we need to think about is, since we all have this unconscious bias, since we all have the potential for it, how do we become aware of it in our daily practice, and how do we minimize its impact on our, as we said, our thinking, our processing of information, and our decision making? But what relationships are we talking about? And there are many in social work, in the social work space. We talk about a whole range of relationships that we form as practitioners with our service users, with our colleagues, with other professionals. And when we talk about service users, it's how long is a piece of string? Because if you're working with a family, that family composition might be quite an extended one. And in that regard, if it is an extended family, then you're looking at many more people within that relationship. How do we ensure that unconscious bias and stereotypes, racism, oppression, discrimination, how do we ensure that these do not creep into our relationships with people? Okay. When we get to right, okay, so I'll just carry on, because I want to talk about some of these definitions before I move into the substantive discussion. This definition by Barker is one that I really feel strongly about, and I feel strongly about. Can you talk about oppression in a positive way? I don't think so, but I like this definition because for me, it speaks to what I have come to understand oppression to be about. And indeed, in my forthcoming book, I have utilized this same definition. So just bear with me while we go through this definition and perhaps think about how this definition, in what ways does this definition speak to us as individual social workers, as groups, as managers, as newly qualified, as more advanced and more experienced practitioners, and so on. So according to Barker in 2003, oppression is the social act of placing severe restrictions on an individual, group, or institution. Typically, a government or political organization that is in power places these restrictions formally or covertly on oppressed groups so that they may be exploited and less able to compete with other social groups. The oppressed individual or group is devalued, exploited, and deprived of privileges by the individual or group which has more power. Where I say my emphasis is the bits that are in red font. I have purposely left them in red font because those are the phrases that speak to me as a practitioner, as an educator, and these are the ones that I ask students particularly to take notice of. It may be that you have your own definition of oppression, you have your own understanding of oppression that you want to utilize, and that's absolutely fine. But we have come to see that it is a social act, and anything that is social means it involves people. So if it is a social act of placing severe restrictions, then certainly in the day jobs that we do, we need to look at how our policies, our practices, our conversations, our assessments, our interventions and conversations with families do not place severe restrictions on them. Okay, and that's them as individuals. When we start talking about groups, again, we are looking at particular groups that we know are oppressed, people seeking asylum, for example, people with disabilities, for example. We know that oppression comes in many forms and to many different people. But actually, the part that I want to bring to attention today is the kind of final paragraph, which says that the oppressed individual or group is therefore now devalued, exploited, and deprived of privileges. As we go along this presentation today, we will look at how that plays out when we're working with service users, when we're working with colleagues, because for me, it is more about how do we as social workers stop that final bit, okay? How do we ensure that people that we work with are not devalued, they're not exploited, and they're not deprived of privileges? That for me is the core of it, because of course one of the things that we do in practice is we do place severe restrictions. So for people who need a particular type of service, they come to you and you tell them we have service A and B only. Okay, but I need service C. No, well, sorry, it doesn't exist in our local authority, or we stop providing that service, or it's no longer available. That is a severe restriction. And whilst I'm not suggesting that we go out and find it by all necessary means, what I am saying is, you know, if oppression is a social act that involves people, then surely we should be having some conversation with people about how do we go about making sure that some of these services that are absolutely needed in our area are there, are retained for us to utilize and support service users with. So if anyone wants to adopt that definition of oppression by Barker, you're very welcome to use it. I think I have the reference at the end of this presentation, but it is one that I absolutely relate to and understand. The discussion then, if you like, the activity at this point then is, you know, on your own or with a colleague, consider this definition of oppression. We've just really done that. I've gone through that. But for me, what I want you to do is pause the computer at this point and think about this. Does it reflect your understanding of oppression? And how might this manifest when you're working with service users? I've already looked at some of the ways in which the manifestation of oppression can come when perhaps when we don't even know what is available to service users. So we're restricting them because we don't know. We're not sure what the services are. And this is why it's absolutely vital that as practitioners, we know the services that are within our area, our local area. We know the services that we need to pay for. We know the services that are perhaps free or, come as part of a package. We need to know these things in order to signpost our service users. So when we're talking about starting or beginning relationships and then kind of maintaining them all the way through, we're talking about the absence of an oppressive relationship. And that's what this session is here to do. So how does oppression, if you like, how does that manifest in the workplace? This is really for you to consider because you will all be coming from different places. You will have different roles. You will be some of you will be managers. Some of you might be, very senior managers. Some more newly qualified practitioners. Some may not be fully trained social workers yet. Family support workers, and so on. And so we need to start thinking from our individual places, from where we sit. How do these manifest in our workplace and in our workspace? I've named a few, and I would urge you to consider any others. So for example, I've talked about bullying. Bullying is oppressive. A lack of trust. I will talk about lack of trust a bit later because in order to build the trust, this is where I'm suggesting that the Mandela model can help improve trust. Unfair and unequal work allocation. Disrespect, aggression and or microaggressions, unfair promotion and progression practices, unspoken rules which remain unspoken to some. Before I ask you to reflect on any others, I would like to take that final point a bit further. So what are the unspoken rules? People turn up, I turn up for a job, I interview for the job, I get the position, I start on Monday. And there's some unspoken rules, but because, I become friends with the team manager or we have a good relationship, I get told what those rules are. So for example, we don't really have enough budget for paying for, I don't know, children in particular homes to have access to particular types of respite, or parents to have respite, and parents and children have respite. I get told that, and I get told the rules of how perhaps to write out my request, who to request from, and all of that. Other people who join before me or after me or with me don't get those unspoken rules. So there's some things that not everybody gets. And as you progress with that kind of practice, you will find that some practitioners daily social work practice is better than others, and it's not for the lack of others not knowing or not wanting to know or not being competent enough. It's the simple case of some people have been told or been given more information than others. And whilst I appreciate that in some instances the practitioner goes and kind of lobbies, for want of a better phrase, lobbies the managers and says, come on, I'm sure you can find £2,000 for us to do this for family A, that is really about knowing that it is possible to go and lobby for that money. If you turn up and you're told we have no money, we do not fund respite care, don't come and ask. I won't come and ask. So in that regard, I feel that these unspoken rules, they should either be unspoken for everybody, that probably makes it fair, or they're open to everyone to know about them and be able to apply for them. So that's the kind of final point I want to make on this. And there's a lot more, and I'm sure that amongst yourselves, either individually or with your groups, you can think about what those might be. Okay, so in the workplace, we have talked about how these manifest. Now, how does any form of oppression, how does that manifest in our work with our service users? I mean, I've started by, saying withholding information, okay? And I have had, over the years, I have had practitioners talk about this. When I have worked, we have spoken about this. Withholding information, I think, in the form of, well, I know that if I tell the service user that there is a vacant property down the road, they might be interested in that property, and therefore that gives me more work, that gives me more hoops. I need to go to panel to ask for the money, or I need to go to some manager to sign off. So you know what, they don't need to know. I will simply keep telling them that there's no vacancy, there's no vacancy, there's no vacancy. So withholding that kind of information is actually quite oppressive, as is providing inaccurate information. And many a times I find that social workers are not always able to say, I do not know. Can you give me some time to find out? And, you know, that's a lot of pressure that practitioners put on themselves, i.e. they feel like they have to know everything. I think it is a lot of pressure. And I do think that in some ways, we should support practitioners to be able to say, you know, I don't know. The rules have recently changed, or it used to be the case that we did it this way. I will go and find out and let you know. And that is providing accurate information. If you don't have the accurate information, you simply say, I don't know. Again, how oppression manifests with in our work with service users is, for example, ignoring the need for language or other support. So, you know, I'm going to go to that family anyway. I know they have some difficulties in English, but actually, mum's really good. If you speak slowly, if you explain to mum, she gets me. That's really not what we're talking about. You know, if the family do need language support or other kinds of support, we can't ignore it based on the fact that one member of the 7 really does get it. So we're going to rely on them. Yes, that helps our budget. I have no doubt about that. But in terms of that kind of oppression, if mum doesn't get it, if she doesn't understand it in the way in which it's intended, that's 6 other people in her family that she's going to misinform. Okay, so that's the issue for me around ignoring the need for language and other support. And finally, when we don't recognize injustice, social injustice, or we don't name it, you know, those are kind of important things for us as social workers, because we are working in a profession that promotes social justice. And so we need to be able to recognize where there's social injustice, even if it is being delivered, that injustice is being delivered by our team, our colleagues, our service. We need to be able to say, and we need to be able to name it. You know, simply saying to a service user, oh no, oh, okay, how you were spoken to or what you were told, that wasn't right, full stop, you know, doesn't really, great, thank you for your empathy, but where does that take me? Where does that leave me? So I would talk about, we as practitioners, we need to recognize the social injustices, and we need to name them. We need to name what they are. And here, I'm just kind of repeating this, and I can see that I've got an incomplete sentence here. My apologies. But this is not automatic. You know, a serious point, as I say, I wish to emphasize is that social justice is not automatic, and your good intentions won't travel far without proactive and active intervention. So anti-oppressive practice, anti-discriminatory practice, and anti-racist practice will not exist until we do something about it, okay? These are not just words that just hang, you know, hang or just exist in the ether. We need to be able to say, we have practiced, we have done X, Y, and Z to promote anti-racist practice. We have done X, Y, and Z to disrupt racist practice or discriminatory practice. So I think that's something that we need to think about. Okay. Okay, sorry, I was just completing that. Okay, so all of that really forms a bit of an introduction, if I can put it that way, into some more substantive conversations that we're going to be having. So the main aim of today is really to talk you through the Mandela model, and we look at ways in which that model may help us maintain really good relationships at the workplace, non-oppressive relationships, not just between colleagues, as I said at the start, but also between us and service users. So, in terms of the Mandela model, it was developed in 2012. I developed it as a relationship building tool. If you've read the paperwork that goes along with the Mandela model, you will find that you will find a bit more history about that, but I don't want to spend today talking you through why I developed it, but I did recognize that there was a need to enhance relationships between and amongst people, because actually mistrust, fear, was really impacting on the way in which people communicated or not, and therefore exacerbated any oppression or discrimination that people were feeling. So the model, I've started from the bottom, so I'll just carry on, developed in 2012 as a relationship building tool. And it's a model which encourages power sharing. by making time to hear about each other and learn about the other. It's a tool, as a tool for anti-oppressive practice, it has the potential to draw out sensitive and important discussions, which enable measured and respectful dialogue. Okay. While I'm talking about the Mandela model and telling you that in 2012, I developed the actual concept, and then the paper came out of that. So the paper has been published in the Journal for Practice, Teaching and Learning. Now, in 2015, I developed these. These are the Mandela model practice cards. Hopefully you can see them. You may or may not have seen them around, but I developed those because people who felt that the model was helpful also said, we need something practical. It's great that we can have your paper to understand where the concept came from, how we use it, what we need to do, and so on, but we need something that we can use, or, and carry in our bags and so on. So the Mandela practice cards came from that. Now this is the model. The model simply, if you think about the acronym Mandela, the model starts right at the top with making time, and it talks about acknowledging people and acknowledging their needs, acknowledging their differences, acknowledging their educational experiences, life experiences, and age. And it comes right back to making time again. Now, towards the end, I'm hoping that we can have a conversation about why this is a cyclical model and not a linear one. That's hopefully we'll do that at the end. But now I'm going to go through each of the stages, if you like, the steps of the model, and just kind of share some insights into how you might use this model with your service users and your colleagues. So we all know, in any relationship that we have formed over the years, in our private lives, within our families, extended families where we've been, relationship building takes time. And even when we meet people for the first time and we say, oh, we only met for 10 minutes and we clicked, you hear these comments, oh, we got on really well after 10 minutes. There was a certain level of comfort. There was a certain level of familiarity, which people decided that, oh, I quite like this person and the way we spoke about this, the weather, COVID, whatever that might be. In the job that we do as practitioners, we are actually paid to make time for people. And I think that to do it effectively is that we need to be able to make that time. Don't forget that when you make time to actually know people, it's a good strategy to also disrupt some of that unconscious bias, because you see me and you see a Black woman with glasses, with short brown hair, whatever, a bit of gray, and you immediately start forming your whatever is in your conscious about me and what I do. But as you keep talking to me and hearing more about me, you discover other elements of me and my personality. You listen, you learn, and we start beginning to think, oh, okay, I'm making time to understand this person and know this person. So I think it's a key thing. Making time is important. For supervisors and managers, it's really important not to rush your supervision. We know that when staff come and see you about, it's my supervision, it's a dedicated 1 hour, I'm really busy today, we can only do 10 minutes. Yeah, okay. Any chance of catching up more than 10 minutes anytime soon? Because what we need to do is we need time for everything, basically, but for conversations, for relationship building, getting to understand the other, and being able to disrupt any oppressive elements and stereotypical elements, we really do need to make time for each other. So we also have to think about, the process through which we make the time. Supervisors and supervisees will have set time that they need to meet. And I'll talk about service users in a minute, but supervisors and supervisees, you will have your regular meetings and schedules. And if they have to be cancelled or rescheduled or moved or whatever, for whatever reason, it is important that supervisees are not made to feel disrespected or ignored. Now, one of the things we have to think about in terms of oppression and unfair treatment is, have you cancelled Jonathan's supervision 3 times, but then have you gone ahead with Jane's supervision? This might be completely unrelated. Jonathan may have been a Monday morning and something always happened on a Monday morning for you. And Jane's might have been a Wednesday afternoon and nothing cropped up. But as you begin to look at it and really unpick what's going on, you will see that actually you've cancelled 3 of Jonathan's, but you've maintained all of Jane's. You're not making time for Jane. And so Jane at that point might begin to feel ignored. She might begin to feel disrespected. So I think that there are ways in which we can utilize different methods in order to create good relationships with people. These are working relationships. And then we can improve our ability to listen as well. Because once you have that supervision time, we hope that you use that time to learn, to hear, and we all learn something new all the time. These are all something to learn about anytime. You hear about how your social worker has dealt with a case or a family that you thought was really difficult, or it was a complex case or complex situation, and that social worker dealt with it brilliantly. You learn something new about particular people. And all of that helps with the judgment. All of that helps us with the way in which we evaluate these members of staff for promotions and so on and so forth. Now, going on, I just want to talk also about when you make time for people, obviously it's a relationship. We also want to make time to listen to feedback. Because once we listen to some of that feedback, it is really useful and can be useful because we can have open and honest conversations with, so why did you feel that way? Well, it's really good that you gave me feedback about team meetings not being long enough or work allocation not being transparent enough. Thank you for that. And I can seek to build a bigger team, a better team, and so on and so forth. So we constantly, as people, in order to sustain an environment where we learn from our own practice, we have to ensure that we are ready to listen. And you can't listen when you're rushed. You can only listen when you've made time and you're really taking in what's going on. So again, just food for thought that people need to think about. How much time do we make for our service users? In a busy social work office, I can imagine that people will be giving all sorts of, it really depends on the case. Yep, I absolutely get that. It depends on the needs. Yep, I absolutely get that. But how many times this week or last week or the week before did you say, I'm really sorry, I'm ringing you, Mrs. Jones, it's going to be a quick 5 minutes? How many times can we recall that we've said that to a service user? How many times has a service user walked through the door? Well, not so much now, physical doors because of COVID, I understand that. But how many times have we said to service users, I'm really sorry, it's a busy day, I've only got 5 minutes? And we need to think about, in some respects, how we feel. And I know this for a fact that this was happening in my surgery. I don't know whether it happened in most, but there is a kind of a timer when you go to see your GP. You can't really say very much, and you can't be sat there for a long time either. So, how do we feel when we go in, the GP's kind of like rushing you through your symptoms? Hurry up, I've got the next patient in a minute. And no, actually, you can't tell me 2 symptoms. You need to give me 1, go out, make another appointment, come and give me the next symptom. That was happening in my local surgery where I lived, and I lived in Milton Keynes. I'm not embarrassed to say that. So if we go as service or people who use the health service and we get treated like that, certainly we're not happy about it. And I just want us at this point to start thinking about that. The GP that stops and listens to our every complaint about every part of our body and puts it, we feel we're getting a better service from them. We feel that we're getting much more of an understanding, and so that is really good. So one of the other things that I need to add is, I've said this already and I can't add any more to it, but one of the other things that we need to do is consider really carefully, once we have done the making time, we need to think about how we acknowledge needs. Now, the model requires social workers to acknowledge needs of service users, okay, colleagues and those we manage. These needs are broad ranged, and the reason why I kind of like the word needs, and then sometimes I think, it's a broad phrase. We acknowledge needs in so many different ways. We have to recognize that in terms of working with our colleagues and our peers, we need to understand that, because listening is the heart of what we do. What are their needs? And we need to come out of those conversations to actually being a bit more understanding of what those needs are. So what do our service users need in order to fully engage with us? We need to think about personal needs in terms of childcare and other caring responsibilities. We really do need to think about our choice of meeting times, meeting venues, um, phones. You know, in the past, probably not so much now, but in the past, I have known social workers to not have service users to say to you, "I've got no credit. You know, I've simply got no credit." And back in the day, that kind of credit also, you needed credit to take a call, not just make a call. And so we need to kind of be aware of those kinds of situations at all times as well. So that is one of the things that, for me, we need to think about. We have to be conscious about people's needs in relation to personal needs, childcare needs, other caring responsibilities, and also in terms of work allocation for people we manage and work with. Again, what I'd like to say about that is, you know, in terms of being a manager and recognizing people's needs, sometimes it feels very tokenistic. Yeah, okay, so yes, you've got young children. I appreciate that you're working full time, and I appreciate this, and I know that for childcare you might have to leave early and whatever. Yes, that's all written, but I will be the same manager to come out and say, Gwen, can you please stay till 5 tonight? We've got a really difficult case. I mean, I told you, and I've said it so many times at supervision, I must leave at the very latest at 4:15 because of childcare, you know. So if we don't acknowledge those needs of our staff, we will begin to get into a position where our practice is oppressive. And I need to make it clear that I'm not talking about breaking the rules or so and so hasn't worked their hours and we're letting them go. I'm talking about a relationship or a situation in which we regard our practitioners' needs and we bring that to the fore, because we can only model that in order to say it's the same for service user. Service user says, sorry, I can't see you at 4 o'clock because I'll be on the bus going to get my kids from swimming. Then they can't see you at 4 o'clock. You know, so for me, a lot of the Mandela model is asking us to kind of model the kind of practice we want to see. So in terms of the workplace, is there a need for an LGBTQI staff group in your organization? Have you done the needs analysis? Has anyone done the needs analysis? Okay, there used to be one 5 years ago. There was no longer a need. Okay, now you have a new member of staff who says there is a need. I think for me, if there is, how might you ensure that colleagues who need this, need to access this group, do so without stigma and surveillance? I remember years ago, many years ago now, where as part of my it was quite interesting, as part of my supervision, I would be asked, have you been to the Black Workers Support Group this month? And the answer would be yes. Is there anything I need to know? And I'm thinking, if there was, you would have heard about it. You know, there is a fine line between being concerned and me feeling I was under surveillance, okay, or I was being monitored. And the meeting was held at a lunchtime on a particular day in a particular local authority. I didn't need to walk very far, to be honest, a couple of floors down, and that's it. But we gradually began to feel that many more people were saying, oh, every time I go back, I'm asked what we're discussing and so on. And I said, well, the standing agenda's there. Why don't we send this to managers so they know what the standing agenda is? I don't see that they need to know the ins and outs of the meeting. And gradually it became unmanageable and people just, you know, dropped off, and finally there wasn't a Black Workers Support Group. So when we acknowledge the needs of our staff, our colleagues, and we recognize that they could do with a group, LGBTQI group, staff with disability group, whatever that group might be, we need to be able to also think about how we will work with them so they're not stigmatized or they don't feel like they're under surveillance. In terms of the spiritual needs or faith needs that have been expressed by some colleagues, you know, what are these and how might you support practitioners who may need this support? And again, we're talking about different kinds of faiths and how people work. You might have a Muslim member of staff who is a practicing Muslim who says to you on a Friday afternoon, can I please take my lunch break early, or can I take my lunch break at 12? Some may tell you I need to go to the mosque, others may just say I need to take lunch at that particular time. I think these are all really important in terms of that connection and that work with colleagues. But the same actually applies for our service users. When we're working with families, when we're working with service users, and Friday is a particularly difficult day because they want the time to go to the mosque, or they're praying, or they don't celebrate birthdays, so don't come asking them, what did you do for little Jane's birthday? We need to be able to acknowledge those things, and it's through conversations, through making time, that we're going to be able to understand all of these other things that fall into play. So again, health needs, we know that unconscious bias might emerge around health and health needs. And so the use of the model may encourage disclosure of health needs. So we start talking about needs, and, suddenly she says, well, every couple of months I have to go for this, I don't know, blood test, or I have to have this steroid injected into my knee because I have arthritis, whatever that might look like. And this may be a conversation that ordinarily wouldn't take place because, that's my disability or not. I may not be calling it disability, it's a health need, and I may not want to disclose it. If I feel that that will be used against me, that will cause me difficulty, or people continuously refer to it, then I may not want to say it. So we need to create, the environment needs to be conducive before we can do anything else. So acknowledging a health need, particularly in the context of unconscious bias, may be really useful, using the model to get to there. Okay. In terms of differences, the concern when you get to D is about the fact that we're all very different. I mean, that's kind of like stating the obvious, but we have, the differences in life chances, social inequalities that come from individuals or group characteristics, all those differences that exist across all facets of our social lives. We really need to think about that when we want to work in an anti-oppressive way, not just with our colleagues and staff, but also with service users. We know that cultural and other beliefs and attitudes, actually, they push and they shape how we understand events or an event, okay? And so we have to think about how may our cultures, as practitioners, how may our culture and beliefs impact on the families we work with, okay? We also have to think about, how do our service users view the world? And how is this different from us? And then finally, I think what's important is, how do these beliefs, either on the part of the social worker or on the part of the service user, how might that belief impact on their help-seeking behavior and understanding of child welfare? So that is an example I'm giving, child welfare. So they believe, they have a certain worldview that is very different from yours. And so we go in, we've done the assessment, there's something happening here, the child is at risk, we're going to remove this child, we're going to do further investigations, and so on and so forth. Okay, so yeah, we'll deal with that. But actually, that belief and that way of responding to the world exists and remains for subsequent children. So in terms of getting that conversation going about that, it is important right at the start to have that. So, when is a headache not a headache? And students that I've taught over the years, find this quite funny, quite interesting. But when does a headache require paracetamol, and when does it just require a glass of water and a lie down? Okay. I'm not trying to undermine anyone's help-seeking behavior. I'm not trying to undermine any group's help-seeking behavior, but this is also about thresholds in pain management, okay? I might think, okay, this headache's because I've not had enough sleep, I'm probably dehydrated, I'm gonna have a glass of water, a cup of tea, and then I'm gonna lie down. And there's somebody else that can feel a headache coming on, it hasn't quite landed in the head yet, it's on its way, and bang, 2 paracetamols. We need to get to a place where we understand where the family's coming from in that regard, so that neither the sleep and the water nor the paracetamols are looked down upon as, why did they do that? It's looked upon as, I get where that's coming from. So you will hear, hopefully throughout this presentation, that I am trying as well during the presentation to model some of the ways in which the Mandela model can be used. And this is because those very differences are what will help us in the future to work with colleagues and not. So coming back to my paracetamol and my water example and a sleep, if you have a member of staff who, when they're getting a headache, it's paracetamol, during your conversations, your discussions, your making time, they will say that to you. They will say, you know, when I get a headache, it takes forever to shift. Therefore, and I'm unable to do anything. Therefore, I wait. As soon as I feel one coming on, I take some paracetamol as a preventative. You have learned something about your colleague, your peer, your supervisee that you probably would never have learned if you hadn't engaged in this conversation. And then you have the one who says, right, I've got 3 hours toil, if that exists anymore, time off in lieu. I've got 4 hours toil. I'm going to leave early today. I feel a headache coming on. I just need an early lie down. Okay, so we need to be aware of these differences, and those are the kinds of things I'm talking about in relation to working with our service users, that once we understand the processes behind their thinking, what cultural beliefs and what culture and other beliefs they have that inform the way they see the world, it also informs the way in which they seek help and the way in which they will accept help from yourself as the practitioners. Okay. So, when I talk about differences here, I'm really conscious that we don't want the conversation to end up being one about othering. So this is what we, the majority, do, and this is what you do as the other. Now, we're absolutely not saying that. What we are saying is it helps us understand difference and helps us respect and acknowledge difference. And all those differences that we talked about in terms of gender, race, religion, ethnicity, faith, sexuality, class, ability, age, all of this can be discussed at this point. Okay, so how might you, as a female social worker, work with a male single father with 2 sons, for example? What might you need to know? What might you need to do? How have they engaged in the past? What have some of the issues been? What makes engagement with them successful? Those are the kinds of things we need to think about, and we need to talk about in the area of differences. And once we begin to embrace those differences as assets and areas of strength, we can work with them. We can work with those differences to be able to move ahead. Now, another thing that I thought, you know, obviously comes out of talking about differences is when we start thinking about differences, automatically you'll find that some similarities will emerge. Okay, so in talking about differences and all the things you have in common, you don't have in common, those can be quite obvious, or they come out through conversation. You may also find that there's a mutual love, for example, of pets. Okay, and that is a powerful way to connect with people who we otherwise may not have. And I think for me, that is one of the important things. So you will find that back in the day, when I worked with young people at risk, you know, it wasn't my style. You know, I was, you know, quite a big woman. Wasn't my style to, you know, to go to work with in trainers. But when I did arrive at work in trainers, my manager knew which particular young people I was going to see. Okay, that was my way of connecting. So whilst I was so different from a lot of the young people that I was working with, I had to connect with them. It was either loud, blaring music in my own car, in my own stereo, having to put up with that, or connecting with them in some other way. So when we start talking about differences, you will actually start finding a lot of similarities. And I have been to conferences and presentations where people have said things like, well, it's it's not always about differences. Sometimes we're more similar to other people than we are different. Yes, that's great. But how do we utilize some of that to enhance the way we practice and to enhance the way we work with other people? And similarly, if you're managing staff or you work with other colleagues, yes, it's all right to talk about, well, if you feel that way inclined, or, um, Formula One becomes a conversation, and then suddenly people's ears pick up, oh, I didn't realize you like Formula One. I do as well. Who do you like? And where do you buy your tickets? And when do you go? Those are useful connectors. And I like the opportunity to use connectors, because really that's where we start looking at, you know what? We are very different, but we are very similar. And so once we start understanding that, we will have a good opportunity in talking about differences to talk about similarities. And I'm moving on to education experiences. And in this part, which is the E of the Mandela model, I will be talking about this in relation to staff and practitioners, and also in relation to service users. So for example, it is an interesting area to discuss, and it's important that as practitioners, we don't make any assumptions about colleagues, where they've studied and what qualifications they hold, okay? It's also important that we recognize that when we talk about education experiences, we're not necessarily talking about qualifications. So the banter that goes on in, I studied at this university and I studied at X, and a comparison about whose was better, and I did the old CQSW versus I did the DIPSWA. Those conversations are important, but we need to make sure that these are not dividing people, that these are not divisive conversations, that actually that we're talking about them for particular reasons. Okay. But it's also important that we recognize that social work being what it is, some people may have come into social work as a second profession, or, or much later in life. And that's really important. So if they've been a teacher, they've held an education qualification or a law qualification, that is important stuff. We don't minimize it. And of course, if I don't tell you, you don't know. So that's a different conversation. But we go right back to making time. And throughout, when you see that maybe one of your social workers is really hot on the law, really does hone in on the law every time they write about, do their analysis of a case, they really hone in this human rights law here, and Children Act here, and care law here, Care Act here. If you see they're really good at that, and they say to you, I did a first degree in law, that's something to be celebrated. That is really something to be celebrated, because that could come across as being really helpful. However, if we don't make time to get to know our colleagues and staff, we can lose some of this vital information. And therefore, then we're looking for books, and we're looking for, reference books to say, oh, who said that about oppression? What's the name of the guy who talked about this law? And then we're asking these questions or trying to find it on the internet, when we have colleagues who are perfectly capable of giving us this information. That is one way to look at educational experiences within the Mandela model with your colleagues or with people you manage. But also, it's important that when you're trying to understand, progression, let's think about education experiences. How do your practitioners approach CPD and other forms of work-based learning? When you say, I need 10 people to go on that course, is there someone whose hand is always up? And is there someone who's like looking away, is like, nah, I don't want to make eye contact, don't make eye contact, because they don't want to be nominated? What is the process of getting people onto CPD courses, and so on and so forth? So we need to start thinking about that in terms of offering that anti-oppressive approach to working with our colleagues. And in terms of service users, the first thing I say to people is we need to be careful not to equate proficiency in English language to being educated. And I think that this is something that we all know by now. When we talk about being culturally sensitive, culturally appropriate with people, we need to know that when we're talking about people educated, you are talking basically about, can you read and write in a language? This is not about English language. So we really want to see some of that come out in the way in which we operate with our service users around educational experiences and educational accolades that they might have. In addition to the English language proficiency issue, it's also important that we understand, or we consider, how our service users might be able to independently complete forms, understand assessments, understand the language, understand analysis. And so when we give them a form, right, okay, here's the assessment I've done, I've given you 24 hours, I'll be back tomorrow to pick it up and have a read and tell me what you understand. if we're not sure that the service user is able to read that, it probably then means that if they're not able to tell you, they might have to ring a third party. And we have to start thinking about some of their own self-esteem. Did they really want Joe Bloggs to know what's going on in their life, but actually Joe Bloggs needs to come and help them understand the assessment that you've written, and not checked whether they, their literacy levels, their English language proficiency level, can understand it. Therefore, they've had to involve a third person. We often, as practitioners, complain about families who ask children to do translations and interpreting for them, and this is no different. Any kind of serious assessment, I should have the say so about who gets to see it. My arm shouldn't be twisted into giving it to my friend down the street or my neighbor even, or somebody I barely know, just because I don't understand it and I'm asking them to interpret it for me. So, the whole idea of education experiences are really important. Now, over the years, I have been really concerned about this slide and the discussion on this slide that I'm about to have. It's not difficult to see in some local authorities which members of staff are supported and sponsored to go on CPD and other courses. And it's not difficult to see those that are self-funding either, and that can be quite sad. Some practitioners I have known have funded their own, for example, practice education courses, their own kind of senior first level management courses. They've used their annual leave to develop themselves. They've used their evenings and their weekends, and other members of staff have been given the time off and so on. These are internal systems that I'm hoping that practitioners and managers will reconsider in terms of that spread, and we need to get to a point where even when practitioners should go obviously and develop their CPD, but we also recognize that there are some courses and some training events that local authorities say, no, we don't fund that, full stop. Well, if you don't fund it across the board. Let it not be that you have funded for certain people and not others. Yeah. So I think for me, that is an important thing to think about. And again, like I said, once you get to the education experiences part of it, you might actually in the discussion and you're making time for people, you might find out that Jane has come to your service, but she's had very little CPD in the past. This is not necessarily about Jane being lazy, not wanting to go, not wanting to engage. This may be because she hasn't been given the opportunity or hasn't been chosen, hasn't been selected, they haven't felt it's appropriate. So conversations around education experiences in this context should be around CPD, ongoing learning, lifelong learning. How do we help you to get to the next level, and so on and so forth. And I think it's a very important one to have. Okay. Now, once we've talked about education experiences, which is the E of Mandela, we talk about the L, which is about life experiences. And of course, our life experiences are so varied and diverse. And, people have a range of experiences which range from experiencing poverty, homelessness, bereavement, loss, abuse, migration, divorce. There's a whole host of experiences that people would have had, discrimination, health, ill health, war, relocation, marriage, all of that, and these shape who we are, and they also shape what we bring to the workplace. So we need to recognize that, and people don't turn up day one to your service and tell you all about all the wonderful life they've had or the not so wonderful life they have. Conversations, working with service users, one-to-one supervisions with you, conversations can draw these kinds of things out. And that's important for us to know from a management level. If we're managing people who have relocated and fled war, this is important to acknowledge in terms of then the kinds of families and cases and issues they want to work with, versus are they able to manage cases like this? Do they need time off? And so on and so forth. It is actually because of the life experiences, mainly because of the life experiences element of the Mandela model, that it's cyclical. And I will talk to you about that in some depth. Also, understanding and recognizing that our privilege is important if we are to begin to understand discrimination and oppression faced by others. So when people talk about their life experiences, sometimes when we talk about general things and then, somebody starts talking about sexism or ageism or ableism or racism, and then the eyes start rolling, people leave the conversation, people stop contributing. You know, for the person who actually is doing the sharing that story, that can be quite painful. But we have to find ways, we have to devise ways of thinking about how this might how we might utilize this, because again, this is experience that we take to work with our service users. The experiences that we have, in addition to our backgrounds and everything else that we've said, contribute to shape our choices. Yeah. So depending on the life experiences I have, I may have decided, right, I've had this, therefore I want to be a social worker, or therefore I want to work with women who have experienced that, or this, that, or the other. But we need to be careful that we don't use those same conversations, those same experiences to discriminate against people who've experienced them, because that's what we're trying to work against. We're merely trying to say by life experiences that these are important considerations to have. They are dynamic, and every day will bring a unique experience to everyone as a person. So, like I said, it's therefore that it's this element of the model that is used, I would say, is to be used flexibly and often. And again, when I come to the cyclical nature of it, I will come back. But I think there's an example on this slide. So the example I give is a colleague who subsequently becomes a parent, may have different needs requiring different approaches and supports. Ignoring this new status of being a parent is likely to cause tensions and possibly strain relationships. So again, Jane comes to work with you. She's not a parent yet. A year down the line, 2 years down the line, she becomes a parent. Her needs change. She comes and talks to you about that. Perhaps another year down the line, she becomes a parent for the second time. The needs change again. So these life experiences are the ones that kind of keep people going, but also should be a focus of kind of, okay, it was all right when I was Jane and I had no kids and I could work till 6 p.m. You thought I was the best thing since sliced bread. And now I'm a parent and I have to put my foot down and finish at 4:30. Suddenly I'm not pulling my weight. I'm not doing this. I'm not doing that. And so we need to recognize that those are the same kind of statuses in terms of the flexibility. Those are the same kinds of things that do sometimes cause us strained relationships. Again, in terms of life experiences and service users, we capture this information as part of the background information or the history, or some people call it chronology. And sometimes when social workers are putting together these documents that have the background of the service user, it can be really painful to see just the depth, the extent of the experiences that some service users bring to the table, what they're bringing to our service. And so it's at that point that we need to begin to start thinking, regardless of where and when and how the service users or the service user speaking to me has experienced some oppression, whether that is systemic or personal. They have most likely experienced some discrimination and racism, and therefore I'm not going to make it any worse. We're in the business of making things better if we can. It is not about making it worse. And so for me, it's a case of, let's think about these life experiences in this process. And finally, the final element of the Mandela model is age. And of course, the first thing we'll say about age is that it's a protected characteristic under the Equality Act 2010. And so when we're working with our colleagues, we need to be mindful of this. How might age impact on working relationships in the workplace? In your view, does age equate to experience and knowledge? So, does somebody have to be older and more experienced to be smart or to be good at what they do? What are we talking about? What exactly are we saying? How does age fit within all this, within this context? Some colleagues will say, as we age, we become a bit slower. So just say, for example, I'm coming up to retirement. I've been doing this for many years. I'm just at the point where I'm passing down some of that knowledge to other people. I'm not able to do 5 home visits a day anymore for various reasons. I can do 2. How does that impact on the actual working relationship within with the practitioners? But also thinking about, in terms of our service users, when we think about age, immediately what springs to mind is, do we use age appropriate language? So of course we spout on about, I spoke to the child using age appropriate language. What exactly is that? What language do we use to speak to a 5-year-old, and how different is it to languages you use to speak to a 7-year-old? And where did you get that language from? Where's the learning coming from? Is that after years of experience? What is that about? And the flexibility and the dynamism of language means that language is changing. So we need to kind of be aware of that. Do we use age appropriate language when working with children and young people? Not just that, not just in terms of age, but also do we use the kind of, do we avoid jargon and things just to make it a bit more understandable? So age is really important when it comes to that. Again, what biases do we hold about people of different ages, younger, older, similar? How do we ensure unconscious bias is not played out in our interactions, behavior, and discussions in the workplace? For example, in some communities and cultures, older people are not challenged and their views always agreed with as a sign of deference. So if you have a service user who says yes to everything, and you're thinking, this service user really is not arguing with me, they're not bringing up their own opinion. Could age be the reason why that's happening? Could it be that they see you as older or much older, more experienced, therefore you know best, and they're just going to, they're going to just take what you're saying? How would we then encourage them to challenge us about our practice if there's that initial deference? And I'm not prepared to argue, they're the professional, they're older than me, da 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 da. Similarly, when that's flipped on its head, what do we do about service users who say, you're too young, you don't know anything, I don't want you as my social worker? How do we approach that kind of situation as well? And how do we support our social workers and our practitioners to deal with that in terms of working with service users? So for me, it's about recognizing that once you start the conversation about age amongst your staff, they can say to you, you know what, when I went out to see this service user and that service user, they did say a few things that were not appropriate about my age. Okay, and then that is a conversation that we can raise later. It is important because also in terms of age, there are different generational things that are happening. So, if you're not in an age where computers were the in thing, you will not be talking about computers, and it might be difficult when you say to a 70-year-old person, I'm going to send that to you by email. Okay, maybe that's a bit of an exaggeration, but you kind of know where I'm going. Or we'll send everything to you by email, or it will come by DHL as well. No, but it's a different kind of courier. I will send it by recorded post. If these things are generational and they don't know what recorded post is, that's just an example, then we have to spend the time saying, well, now we have post that comes out within 24 hours. It's called DHL or it's called FedEx, etc., 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 etc. So age is an important signifier as well about generations. It helps us understand not just the language we use, but the attitudes, the interventions, and also in terms of trying to facilitate work with service users, it helps us understand what that might be about. I was speaking to a colleague a couple of weeks ago, actually, in the wake of this COVID and all these conversations about online this and online that. And the first words that came out of her mouth was, I think it's about time to retire. I'm not going to be able to learn this. I'm not going to be able to learn that. And with my age, I can't do this and I can't do that. And I said, stop it. Absolutely stop it. We didn't know we're going to be able to do so many things because everything was so far advanced and things, but you will be able to do it. So that's the kind of situation we find ourselves in. In order not to stereotype people because of their age and things like that, we need to be careful how we use the current conversations about internet use and so on. How we use that language in the workplace, we need to really consider it so we don't make people feel inadequate and incapable of doing and using things like that. Okay, so At this point, I usually ask you guys, anyone participating or listening to this video, now you've heard about the Mandela model, can you think about why it's presented in a cyclical format and it's not linear? And it's just simply because we want to, you know, it's not linear because it feels like when it's linear, there's an end to it. Okay, maybe the end is, when we're not here any longer, but that's not what I'm about. I'm about saying that it's cyclical because you can keep revisiting all those elements again. Like I said to you, Jane starts, she's not a parent. In a year's time, she becomes a parent. In 2 years' time, she becomes a parent for the second time. And then we go, her needs are changing. Education needs are changing. She was probably really good on going to CPD. Now she doesn't want to go. She's got no time. She's really busy. She's become 2 years older again, or a year older each year. So you see that the elements of the model are going round. Similar with bereavement, with marriage, with experiencing poverty and ill health, and all of that. As our lives change, those can be revisited, and any manager, any colleague seeking to work and maintain anti-oppressive practice will be looking to have those conversations over and over again. This is relationship based because if we don't want to talk to people, we're in the wrong job. So sometimes I don't get how, there are some people who don't want to talk to particular staff, or staff who don't want to talk to particular managers, but they're quite happy to go out and talk to service users for an hour. Now, great, it's good that you're doing the job, but actually the whole job comes about because of our relationships and relationship building. And whilst I'm conscious that some people want to be able to have one-off conversations, I am also very clear that in terms of social work, we have to keep coming back. Now, as we kind of head towards the last few slides, I want to talk briefly about why people leave jobs, and then I will talk about why people leave social work jobs, and then we can have a conversation around that, or I can ask you to do some further reflection. So there was a survey by Unison that says the 5 top reasons why people leave jobs, and these are just any jobs, but very much related to what we're talking about today, is poor management, usually, or poor relationship with the manager, lack of employee recognition. So people work hard, they're grafting, but they don't seem to be appreciated, or they don't think they're being recognized sufficiently enough. Overworked employees, organizational culture of treating each other poorly and disrespectfully, and no progression or growth. So these are the top 5 reasons. And it was a general survey. So obviously hopefully there would be some social workers involved in that. Now, all of those have influence, or all the things we've talked about in relation to Mandela model can influence why people leave jobs. I'm absolutely sure about that. But let's go to the social work ones, just so that we can keep the conversation going. And here I picked the top 3. Okay. So the first reason why social workers are leaving is austerity and budget cuts. And I don't think that will come as a surprise to anybody. People are leaving because they don't feel they're able to do their jobs properly. We want to be able to offer the service, recommend a service and offer the service. And now we're being told, nope, that service has been cut, that service has been cut, that service has been cut. So these are some of the reasons why. So one is austerity and budget cuts. The second is unfilled vacancies leading to overworking. And 80% of social workers who completed that survey said they worked beyond their contracted hours. So we're not going to talk about the burnout just yet. We're just talking about unfilled vacancies. And I think many people will think that it's because, well, generally they're unfilled vacancies, but what can we do as managers, as employers, to ensure that we minimize the rate at which people are leaving social work? And the third one, and this is not in any particular order, by the way, I just kind of put these together, is high caseloads. And one social worker in Basildon actually has 44 different families on her caseload. Excuse me. She has 44 different families on her caseload, and he or she made a really poignant statement. Says, I cannot continue to be the face of a failing service anymore. I think it's failing. What's happened to my spelling today? I'm really apologies. Failing service anymore. Now that's important for us to note. And it's important because we're talking about some of these things in terms of if we use the Mandela model to kind of find out how colleagues are getting on with their caseloads, with their families, you will hear some of this before it becomes a reason why people have actually left the job. And so I do think that these are important for us to consider, but I put them in here only to show that in terms of things like the austerity and budget cuts, you know, you think, gosh, how does how will the Mandela model sort that out? Of course, the Mandela model won't sort it out. What it will do is probably give people a voice, because all the service users that you're working with and all your practitioners can put in some kind of a statement to somebody who might listen to say, we are not happy that they have stopped or they've closed down the nursery down the road because it served a lot of our service users used it for offering free childcare while they got on with other things. It's important, I think, that we have those dialogues and we understand what that's about. It's also important because when we start talking about needs, you know, what do our service users need? And they tell you, well, why did they close that youth centre down the road? I used to send my teenagers there every week. Yeah, that is an austerity issue, but then that means that you've got more, you've got cases, or you've got young people that you have to find entertainment for, if you like, you know, if it's a preventative measure. And so for me, these are important discussions that will only be had within the context of somebody feeling safe and able to have those conversations. Now, just as I was completing this training for today, I came across this from community care, and I wasn't happy with it. And I'm in the process of having conversations with people about what can be done about it. And I'm not going to open it on here. It's there for you to see. But it fits brilliantly with what we're talking about in terms of that oppression I was talking about. That, you know, when there's a group of people that are just subjected to some kind of poor treatment, it does say what it is: Black ethnic minority social workers disproportionately subject to fitness to practice investigations. On two levels, really. I'll talk about this and I will move on and allow you to kind of think about it yourself. So on one level, the ethnic makeup of the people on the panel is not diverse enough. So I think they have, Social Work England has said that themselves. And on another level, you know, social workers are disproportionately subjected to fitness to practice investigations. Now, it won't take long for, and I know this is happening, it won't take much longer, should I say, for people, Black social workers certainly, to identify which particular local authorities or employers tend to subject their Black staff to fitness to practice. Those local authorities or those employers will see less and less applicants from these community groups. And then that affects, obviously, depending on the makeup of the area, that then impacts on who they work with in terms of service users and whether or not your staffing group is diverse enough and mirrors your staffing group mirrors the community it serves. So I've just put this in there. I mean, it came in at the last minute. It's not something that I have, you know, thought about in any depth, but I have started having conversations with people about this. It's not great, but it falls right in the middle of what we're trying to say. If you try attempt the Mandela model with any social workers that are perhaps struggling, or you think you're about to subject to fitness to practice, may it have a change? I don't know. I am yet to look at that as a specific piece of work, and I may get back to you with some of that information. Okay, coming towards the close now. I've put some reflective questions. In black, the ones are around practitioners and managers, and in red specifically about service users. These are questions that you can take away to think about for the last 10-15 minutes of the session. So the first question is, and it's funny, it follows the community care outline, is which groups are in the minority in your workplace, and do you know why they are, and what can you do to change this trend, if anything? Okay, so that's one. And then the next one for the service users, what about service user groups in your area? You know, have you mapped this out? Has the local authority mapped it out? If I ask any social worker in your local authority, will they be able to say to me, yes, we've got 15% Punjabi speaking, 10%? Will they know this, or will they go looking for a reference book? Perfectly fine if they know where to find it. But is this something that we routinely know? Second reflective questions. Do practitioners and other staff feel safe to air their views about their experiences in the workplace? And note that your workplace should not encourage a culture of silence. So we're hoping that this model actively promotes dialogue and discussion. So we don't want this thing where people are not happy about stuff, but they just keep it and there's just nowhere to share it. So I'm hoping that the model does what it says on the tin. I know it has done in terms of feedback so far over the years. Also consider, this is more individual now, consider whether your daily actions, your words, reflect the values of inclusion and are anti-oppressive and anti-racist. Okay, so this is now about individuals taking ownership of the language they use on the phone, in their letters, face-to-face with service users, or now through Zoom, whatever communication. Do your words reflect the values of the profession, and do they reflect inclusivity, anti-oppressive and anti-racist practice? Also think about, have there been any service users who've complained about oppressive or racist practice from you as a person or your organization? What was the nature of the complaint? What was done about it? And what has been done about it, i.e. what has changed? Fourth reflective question, I want you to take away and think about how you might initiate meaningful, complex, and sometimes difficult conversations with colleagues, and how you might record and document these conversations if required. And I've said again, how do you currently do this with service users? So we generally, social workers are good at giving bad news in a way that's not too painful. I mean, the contents usually sometimes service users don't want to hear, but we're very empathetic in the way we deliver it. If we think about the social worker who's perhaps not pulling their weight, that we feel they need to go down fitness to practice or some kind of performance management route, how do we initiate those meaningful conversations? They're complex, they're not easy, and how do we record them? If you're a supervisor, number 5, what does your current supervisory framework look like? And I'm saying here now, is it possible to integrate elements of the Mandela model? I would say to everybody, if you're going to do anything with that model, please make the time. The M for me is the most important. I could have happily stopped at M and just said make time for people. I could have happily stopped there because I feel that once you make time for people, generally things will fall into place, but we have to make that time meaningfully and honestly. Okay, so in terms of conclusion, the social work profession promotes social justice and advocates equality and fairness in all areas of practice. And of course, we've got to consider this when we're working with others in the workplace. As we continue to experience the effects of COVID-19 and we return to very different work environments and circumstances, we need to ensure that no one is left behind. So these new circumstances, this new normal they're talking about, how has that impacted on people? Do you feel that people will turn up back at work whenever we do and just tell you about their whole 6 months of COVID? Or do you feel that you will need a Mandela type framework to actually draw out some of these experiences? What are the similarities? What are the differences? What can we all learn from? How can we make our practice and our provision much stronger based on some of the conversations that we gain from the framework? So I end by saying this actually may be a useful time to introduce the Mandela framework, which encourages what I'm calling strategic empathy by making time to understand how people individually and collectively have experienced COVID-19, so the life experiences, and how these experiences are similar or different to others' experiences. Finally, it's absolutely vital that we use the model to aid daily reflection. So as a practitioner, we hope that you make time and space for reflection. You might say, when I had that conversation with Jane today, I could feel she needed 2 hours, but I only had 10 minutes. Okay, I'm reflecting on that. I'm going to send Jane an email first thing in the morning and ask if she wants another appointment, or she wants, whether I'll give her another appointment, and hopefully she'll be able to attend that and we can make up the time. So I'm hoping that this helps us, model and aid reflection. I'm also hoping that when you think about oppression, and you go back all the way back to Barker, you will begin to see that in terms of how we as people or social workers are working, we are hoping that we do not place severe restrictions on individuals. And we don't place those restrictions either in terms of the time we give them, in terms of the differences and similarities. We don't make excuses about being too busy. Those restrictions that lead to oppression, we hope we're not doing those, we're not giving that. And also, we're hoping that we don't want, or we don't lead to people feeling devalued or exploited. So when we talk about people leaving social work because they have 44 families on their caseload and they all work overtime, which is not valued and not appreciated, that is devaluing and exploiting people. And so for me, going right back to thinking about how we create and sustain an anti-oppressive environment, I think that the Mandela model shows a lot of promise. I think that the Mandela model is able to give us a framework that helps us to start thinking about all of this and just recognizing that oppression, discrimination, racism has no place in social work. Never has, never will do, and that as social workers and practitioners, we must be actively involved in trying to improve not only our own practice, but the experiences of service users who come to our service and who come to who expect a service from us. Okay. And then finally here I have some references that I hope that people can reflect on and access. And I'd like to thank you all very much for joining this presentation today. I know it's a recorded one, but thank you all very much. And I look forward to talking to you again in the future. Thank you.